Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Shame 2011, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. He wakes long before the city stirs, the hush of pre-dawn pressing against his apartment windows like a secret. The digital clock beside his bed glows 5:13 a.m., and he stretches, not quite ready to face another day weighed down by relentless yearning. Outside, the streets are silent, save for the distant hum of an early bus threading through empty avenues. He rises, disoriented by the quiet, as though the world has paused to hold its breath, knowing that he is about to traverse a landscape of craving and denial that few can bear to chart. Inside his sleek midtown studio, he flicks on a lamp, its warm glow battling the pale light creeping through blinds. The room is immaculate in its spare elegance. Polished hardwood floors, a single abstract painting hung with care, and a black leather sofa that looks as if no one has truly sat upon it in years. Yet despite the order, the air crackles with tension, as though every surface hums with residual whispers of impulses barely restrained. He moves through this modern sanctum with the precision of a man determined to maintain control, but beneath his facade, currents of compulsion streak like cracks in ice, threatening to shatter the calm he has strived so hard to cultivate. In the bathroom, he stares at his reflection, clean-shaven cheeks, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that both search and recoil from their own depths. He runs his hands through dark, carefully styled hair, as though hoping to reset the day's trajectory before it even begins. Each morning ritual, shaving, showering, dressing in crisp white shirt and perfectly knotted tie, becomes an exercise in armor, a way to fortify himself against temptations that prowl just beyond the silk curtain's edge. Yet in the mirror's glass, he sees more than a polished surface. He glimpses a man tethered to desires that flicker like stray embers, refusing to be snuffed out by discipline alone. As he steps into the corridor, the plush carpet dulls the click of his shoes, and the elevator doors slide shut with a soft rush. 15 floors descend behind a hiss, and when they open, the lobby's marble sheen glows under fluorescent bulbs. There, a doorman offers a polite nod, as though acknowledging not just a tenant but a kindred spirit waging a private war. The doorman's eyes flicker with unspoken recognition. He, too, has seen the way darkness can amplify in solitude, how craving can warp the most orderly of lives. On the subway platform, the bitter chill of early morning wraps against him, but he wears no coat, as though exposing himself to cold might freeze the fire within. A train rattles into the station, its roar echoing through damp tunnels, and when he boards, he finds a seat near the window. Outside, the city rushes past in blurred streaks of red and yellow, stoplights, brake lights, neon signs dispensing caffeine to other weary travelers. He leans his head against glass, eyes narrowing as the world skews by, and for a moment he allows himself to slip into a reverie, a memory of connection, of a warmth that once tethered his fractured self to something other than craving. His office lights come on in sync with the sunrise. He steps into a corner cubicle among a forest of identical workstations, the hum of computers and scattered chatter weaving a tapestry of routine. Here, in this cubicle corridor, the uniformity of business suits and corporate jargon forms a crust of normalcy over an undercurrent of desperation. He offers polite smiles to colleagues whose faces he barely registers, an HR manager discussing benefits, a project lead presenting metrics, a receptionist arranging coffee deliveries, none aware of the private tempest he carries beneath his tailored suit. His phone rings just as he settles at his desk. He answers with crisp professionalism, hiding the tremor beneath practiced calm. Plans, deadlines, deliverables, they swarm around him, and he responds with efficient precision. Each task completed, each email sent, becomes a ration of control. Yet even as he types, part of his mind flickers with a familiar cadence, the dance of anticipation that sings just beneath discipline. He finishes a report, marks a spreadsheet as final, and finally allows his pulse to slow, his gaze drifting toward the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city's sprawl. When lunch arrives, he ventures down to a nearby deli, ordering a simple sandwich and a bottle of water. He eats alone at a high-top table near the window, watching pedestrians thread through sunlit sidewalks. He notices the way couples hold hands, strangers greet each other with laughter, mothers shepherd strollers with watchful eyes. He feels a flicker of something, envy or longing, he cannot quite name it. The deli's overhead music croons with an upbeat tune that feels discordant with his inner shadow, and he wonders if the smiles around him are as brittle as the ones he practiced that morning. His afternoon slide begins with a stray temptation, an email from someone who remembers him outside the cubicle's fluorescent glow. Someone whose text lines flickered on his phone during restless nights, whose images danced like flickering candles in the glare of midnight. He resists for 1, 2, 3 stolen moments, then hesitates as his thumb hovers above a message. He tells himself he can be careful, detached, that he's the one in control. But the familiar static of warning hums beneath that assumption, a muted alarm he has learned to ignore too often. Compulsions coil like serpents, slithering around each rational thought. He closes his eyes at his desk, breathing in and out, repeating a silent mantra. No, not now. But when no one watches, he slips from his chair, his tie loosened, and retreats to a quiet corner of the office where no security camera peers. There, with trembling hands, he engages in a ritual that both galvanizes and corrodes him. Textures, images, sensations all converge in a whirl of momentary release and long-lasting shame. Each breath in that dim cubicle feels like surrender, and each breath out echoes with regret. By late afternoon, he returns to his desk, stepping back into the mosaic of corporate rigor as though nothing has transpired. He straightens his tie in the reflection of a polished computer screen, pressing his palms flat against the desk to reclaim composure. Despite his efforts, the lingering hush of shame drapes over him, as heavy as dusk descending on the city skyline. He finishes the day's work with mechanical precision and leaves, the elevator doors closing on his shadowed silhouette as neon signs flicker on in the streets below. He boards the subway again, this time heading north to a neighborhood where buildings stand tall with late 19th century brick facades, their stoops worn by generations of restless souls. As the train rumbles through, splashes of late afternoon sunlight flicker through windows, illuminating dust motes that drift like ghosts. He steps off at his stop, the air carrying a cold edge, hinting at an approaching chill. The streets are dotted with bars and window-lit apartments, each a potential refuge or graveyard for craving. He strides past graffiti-stained walls and shuttered storefronts until he arrives at the entrance of a crumbling high-rise, its lobby a tableau of flickering overhead lights and chipped tile floors. Inside, he rides a narrow staircase up several flights, each step echoing in hollow shafts. On each landing, dim fixtures cast elongated shadows, and the faint odors of stale smoke and damp plaster mingle like a ghostly perfume. He reaches the half-lit hallway where the door to his sister's apartment stands ajar, a warm glow spilling into the corridor. He hesitates outside, gathering himself before crossing the threshold, knowing that inside he faces not only her steady compassion but also a mirror reflecting his fractured soul. Her apartment is small but suffused with soft light and the scent of jasmine tea. Pottery jars filled with fresh pens and sketchbooks sit on a cluttered table where she hunches over drawings. Caricatures of strangers, designs for her latest freelance gig, doodles shaped like tiny pastoral worlds. When she looks up and sees him standing in the doorway, her face bursts into a smile that wavers with concern. She sets aside her pencil and races across the room, enveloping him in an embrace that feels like sanctuary, even as it reminds him of all he has to hide. She guides him to a couch piled with blankets and pillows, and spills hot tea into chipped mugs. Its steam swirls like lullabies between them as she searches his face for words unsaid. He avoids her gaze, stirring sugar in his tea, but the silence between them throbs with unspoken worries. She tries gentle questions, about work, about sleep, about whether he is eating enough, each one a lifeline thrown into a river of his own self-reproach. He nods, shrugs, lies with casual scrapes of truth, but her eyes see through the fiction. She leans forward, fingertips tracing the steam rising from his mug, as though willing him to exhale his shame into the room's soft light. Later, he leaves her apartment for a row of bars that hum with late-evening energy. He steps onto a sidewalk glittering with rain-slick reflections of neon signs, blue, red, and green dancing in puddles like fractured jewels. He heads to a corner bar whose door exhales a breath of laughter and clinking glasses. Inside, he perches at the edge of a stool, shading his face under a baseball cap. A neon open sign flickers above him like a beckoning eye. He orders a whiskey, neat, no ice, and the bartender slides a glass to him with a practiced nod. The amber liquid catches the overhead lamp's glow like fire caught in a jar. He sips the whiskey with measured deliberation, each swallow carving warmth through the cold ache that resides beneath his skin. Around him, the bar's patrons converse in overlapping currents. Two men dissecting the day's trading, a woman lamenting her latest heartbreak to a sympathetic friend, a trio of students swapping jokes that ricochet through the dimness. He listens to the ambient soundtrack, jazz playing low from speakers, tinkle of glass, muffled laughter, and tries to position himself as an observer, a spectator immune to the pull. Yet inside, compulsion coils again, and he rises, intent on slipping toward a more private refuge. He climbs the stairs to a dimly lit rooftop terrace above the bar, where cool air and distant traffic murmurs mingle under a canopy of city lights. The skyline stretches before him, a collage of spired church steeples, glittering towers, and blinking antennas. He leans on the railing, the metal slick under his palm, and inhales deeply, tasting the night's crisp promise. Below, the bar's din fades into a single note of serenity, and for a moment he feels untethered from his cravings, if only for an instant. Behind him, footsteps approach, and a woman steps onto the terrace, leaning against the railing beside him. She is a stranger whose presence feels both startling and strangely comforting, as though she materialized from the city's underground currents. She lights a cigarette, the glowing tip carving a faint halo in the night air. She looks at him, not with judgment but with a flicker of recognition, as though she senses the undercurrent swirling beneath his calm exterior. They exchange nods, and she inhales deeply, exhaling a swirl of smoke that drifts toward the lights below. They talk in hushed tones, their conversation a delicate dance between confessions and deflections. She speaks of her own restlessness, her job at a publishing house that both fulfills and corrodes her soul, her longing for connection in a city teeming with millions yet starved for intimacy. He listens, threading her words like pearls on a string, feeling the hum of shared yearning beneath each utterance. He responds in fragments, revealing only layers of himself that feel safer slipping through the gaps between full disclosure and concealment. In the early hours of the next morning, he drifts home, the city's glow fading behind him like an ember sinking into ash. He steps into the dim corridor of his apartment building, pausing at the threshold of his door. He lingers for a moment, listening to his own ragged breath, as though waiting for judgment. Then, with a careful turn of the knob, he crosses into the hushed sanctuary of his sleek studio. He flicks on a table lamp, its light a beacon against the darkness, and stands alone in the center of the room. The world outside slumbers, but inside, his internal landscape churns with shifts of yearning, regret, and a flicker of resolve. This is a movie that travels into the heart of lonely city nights and the fragile architecture of a man's psyche, where desire and shame dance a restless tango, each step echoing in the hallways of memory and the corridors of impulse. It's a story that stirs in the darkness, demanding you witness its raw edges even as it compels you to look away. The opening conceit introduces him as both architect and prisoner of his own compulsions, a successful executive by day, a man hollowed out by his private rituals in the hours no one is watching. His habits have become a sandbox he cannot escape, a search for momentary release that dissolves into long nights of regret. The past flits into view like a series of distorted snapshots. The day his father's stern voice fell silent forever, the way his sister's bright laughter shattered when she learned of her brother's secrets, the silence of his mother's voice when she realized his charisma masked something darker. The past flits into view like a series of distorted snapshots. The day his father's stern voice fell silent forever, the way his sister's bright laughter shattered when she learned of her brother's secrets, the silence of his mother's voice when she realized his charisma masked something darker. Those memories swirl beneath the veneer of his present, tugging at the seams of his carefully curated life. Into this fragile world steps his sister, a harbinger of love held together by threads of hope and fear. She arrives almost unannounced one evening, carrying the aroma of jasmine tea and late-night concern. She slips into his apartment, her voice a melody he has both craved and avoided. Their interactions unfold with the quiet tension of two survivors shaping roles. He, the stoic brother determined to shield her from his darkest deeds. She, the guardian of his battered soul, insisting on seeing the man beneath the compulsions. Their sibling bond becomes a lifeline, forged in childhood battles and momentary triumphs, tempered by a fierce devotion that refuses to break even as his secret spirals. Every location he inhabits becomes a reflection of his inner turmoil. The glossy office lights that glare in his cubicle feel like searchlights, threatening to expose every hidden twitch of his behavior. The sterile hospital corridors where he visits a colleague become mausoleums of his own losses, echoing back each suppressed memory he cannot bear to conjure. The grimy backroom of a bar, where he stumbles toward fleeting reprieve in the hours before dawn, becomes an underworld limbo where regret and craving merge into one. And the rooftop where he finds momentary solace in the city's wide embrace, that space between heaven and hell, reminds him that every impulse carries the risk of both collapse and epiphany. The plot twists in shades of shadow and light. One evening, he meets a woman whose late-night cigarette billows like a ghost's whisper. She becomes a spectral guide, someone whose own yearning mirrors his, whose presence both wounds and heals him. Their late-night confessions bind them in shared isolation, yet their connection stands poised on a razor's edge. A single misstep could rupture everything they attempt to build. He clings to fleeting moments of tenderness in her company, but as his compulsions spiral, her tentative compassion morphs into fear, and he realizes that the very intimacy he craves might be his undoing. His sister's own life becomes entangled with his undoing. She grapples with her own needs, her career, her relationships, the dawning awareness that living with someone consumed by compulsion demands both courage and sacrifice. As she pushes him toward confrontation, seeking that breakthrough moment that might shatter his cycle, she finds herself balancing on a narrow tightrope between hope and heartbreak. Their shared history emerges in fractured dialogue and silent admissions, each moment layered with risks that neither can fully quantify. In a climactic descent, his attempt to seize a moment of illicit connection threatens to topple the fragile coalescence of his entire existence. The city's underbelly, a network of neon signs, late-night clubs, and flickering hotel lobbies, becomes his proving ground. There, every door he opens feels like a threshold between release and total collapse. The camera's gaze tightens on his face as he stands in a dimly lit corridor, the glare of a red light above him pulsing like a heartbeat. He hesitates, and in that heartbeat, you sense that one decision will fracture his world irreparably. The music, once a gentle strum, swells into dissonant chords, echoing the tremor in his soul. As dawn bleeds into the horizon, he finds himself on the precipice of destruction and rebirth. Confronted by a moment of reckoning, an intervention that arrives without warning, a voice he thought he had silenced echoing in the hollow spaces of his mind. He must choose, continue down a spiral that promises only emptiness, or claw his way toward a fragile chance at redemption. His sister's hands grip his shoulders in a crowded waiting room. His lover's voice trembles with dread. And in that flash of suspended time, he glimpses the possibility that his life might be more than a series of desperate quests for oblivion. Those final moments pivot on a single question. Can he rewrite the script of his own desires, reclaim agency over a self that has become both ghost and prisoner? The answer lies in the fractured lines etched across his face, lines that speak of shame and longing, of regrets that run deeper than his midnight tumbles. As the film's final light fades, we are left on the edge of possibility, suspended in a silence that speaks louder than any final note. This cinematic journey beckons from the film's first frame to its final whisper, inviting you to inhabit the shadows alongside a man whose polished exterior conceals a maelstrom of craving. It is a narrative that pulses with raw intimacy, a story not simply watched, but felt, vibrating in the hollow spaces of our own unspoken desires. It teases us with illusions of control and dares us to face the hollows we all carry, in city streets both sleepless and silent. And as the urban dawn breaks and those final credits emerge, each name scrolling across the screen carries the echo of every hand that helped weave this tapestry. Each sightline composed, every sound carefully layered, every cut and crossfade calibrated to draw us further into a world where shame and hope collide. The end arrives not as an answer but as an invitation, a challenge to reckon with the shadows within our own reflections, to question how far we might go chasing oblivion, and to wonder whether, in the haze of instinct and impulse, we, too, might find a sliver of redemption in the faintest glow of self-awareness he wakes before sunrise, long before the pale sky begins to soften into dawn. The digital clock on his bedside table glows 5:07 a.m., and he lies there for a moment, eyes half closed, listening to the gentle hum of city life slumbering below. When he finally rises, he moves through his sleek apartment with a calmness that masks the turmoil beneath. His reflection greets him in the bathroom mirror, dark eyes framed by a sharp jaw, hair combed yet already messy from sleep, yet he studies that reflection as though it belongs to a stranger. He methodically shaves, rinses his face, and dresses in crisp trousers and a tailored white shirt. Each motion is precise, like a rehearsal he has performed countless times. Underneath lies a current of unrest, an insistent ache that pulses with every heartbeat. He leaves his apartment and descends a quiet stairwell, each footstep muted by a plush runner. In the lobby, the elevator doors open with a soft sigh, and he steps inside, pressing the button for the lobby floor. A doorman nods as he exits into the street, where the air is cool and still, pregnant with possibilities he both craves and fears. He walks with purpose to the subway station, the narrow corridor stifling until he emerges onto the platform where few are waiting. The screech of the arriving train jolts him, and he climbs aboard, finding a seat near the window. Outside, the world races past in blurred streaks, streetlights, store signs, fellow commuters, while inside, he holds himself as though tethered to an invisible anchor. Each station he passes brings him closer to the facade he has built for the day ahead. On the subway, he checks his phone. No messages. He moves toward the corporate high-rise where he works, his shoulders squared as though bracing against the currents of temptation that swirl unseen. In the lobby, security guards offer polite greetings, and his colleagues nod in passing, oblivious to the furnace of compulsion that rages beneath his clean-cut exterior. He takes a seat in the open-plan office, a sea of identical desks and glowing monitors. Fluorescent lights flicker overhead, mimicking the hum of fluorescent humankind. He powers on his computer, scrolling through emails with disciplined detachment, meeting requests, performance metrics, the latest organizational chart. Each task achieved is a ration of control, a fragile reclamation of authority over a mind that strays the moment he turns his back. He focuses on spreadsheets, crafting financial projections as though each cell could anchor him to normalcy. Yet the walls feel too close, the hum of the air conditioner a buzzing threat. At intervals, his gaze drifts to the phone's small screen, where he knows a message could arrive at any moment. A seductive image, a casual invitation, a whisper from someone who knows his darkest need. He fights the urge to slip away, to seek that fleeting reassurance that his craving endures, that his appetite cannot be tamed. When mid-morning arrives, he texts his sister, brief pleasantries about a family artifact she plans to send him, his fingers trembling as he types. Her reply appears almost instantly, a heart emoji and a reminder to eat lunch. He closes the phone and takes a deep breath, scattering his anxiety like light through a prism. Lunch is taken alone, a turkey sandwich from the deli around the corner. He sits at a window table, the city's pulse reflected in greasy napkins and a half-emptied bottle of water. Outside, a businessman in a tailored suit escorts a woman whose laughter ripples through the afternoon air, her high heels clicking on pavement. A mother with a stroller maneuvers her child past street performers, and the contrast between their ordinary world and his hidden compulsion hums between sips of water. He forces himself to chew slowly, to savor each mouthful as though it anchors him to the tangible. Yet beneath that mindful ritual, attention coils like a snake, waiting for a soft hour to strike. The afternoon drags on with relentless efficiency. He reviews project proposals, logs into video conferences, and offers input with crisp clarity. A colleague passes his desk, asking for a signature on a document. He obliges, masking the tremor in his hand. Each nod, each professional courtesy, feels like walking a tightrope above a canyon of desire. When the workday finally concludes, he allows himself a faint exhale. Packing his briefcase, he rehearses the path to his next refuge, a rooftop bar he frequents when the night feels too heavy. He ascends again, this time to the rooftop terrace of a downtown bar where the city light stretches in every direction. The rooftop string lights flicker on as he approaches, casting a soft haze around the gathering patrons. He finds his usual stool at the edge, orders a neat whiskey, and cradles the glass between his palms. The first sip scorches his throat, a comforting burn that mirrors the ache within. Below, sirens wail in distant avenues, a lullaby to his unrest. Around him, people laugh and clink glasses, couples leaning in close, friends reciting wild anecdotes, loneliness shared in silence by strangers seeking respite from day's burdens. He pours himself another shot, the amber liquid a temporary ambrosia, and in that moment he believes he can outrun his hunger. Night falls like a cloak, and he leans into the railing, surveying the sprawling glow of office towers and apartment lights. Somewhere below, someone waits, a stranger whose profile he has glimpsed through a wink or an exchange of words. That woman, an apparition in city's haze, holds his gaze one night, her silhouette illuminated by neon. She descends the narrow staircase to the terrace, and he watches as she approaches, her smile a flicker of recognition, as though she senses the storm simmering beneath his practiced calm. They exchange cautious hellos, her voice soft but curious. They trade small talk, work, weather, the city's rhythm, yet each carries an invisible ledger of hidden wants. She slips away with a promise, "See you out," leaving him with a tremor in his chest and an ache that hums louder than the city below. Back at his apartment, he steps inside as though crossing a threshold into a private realm where craving slides beneath skin like a current. He flicks on the lamp, its glow soft as a whisper, and moves to a small shuttered alcove concealed by a curtain. He draws it back, revealing a narrow world lined with keyboards, screens, and satellite receivers. In that dimly lit enclave, he risks exposure for an hour's reprieve. Images and sensations flicker across glowing monitors, each click offering both solace and despair. His breath shudders as he succumbs. The euphoria tastes like ocean brine, sharp and unforgiving. Yet with each crescendo, shame follows, an unwelcome companion that crawls across his skin once the screens flicker to black. Dawn arrives again in quiet rebellion. He struggles from the alcove, spine curved like an ancient bow, eyes reddened and skeletal from lack of sleep. He showers, shaving stubble as though scrubbing away last night's sins. He dresses once more in crisp attire, straightening his tie with a patience honed by desperation. When he steps outside, the city has awakened, and he joins its tidal flow, rushing to catch trains, clutching coffee cups, offering polite nods. Each interaction feels laced with artifice, each smile polished and brittle. He boards a commuter train with half-shut eyes, clutching a slender folder of reports to ground him in the daylight world. His sister's name flickers on his phone as he settles in. He presses the message, and her reply blooms across the screen. "Any big plans for tonight?" He stares at the text, his pulse tightening. He decides not to respond. She is trying to build a semblance of normalcy, mapping out simple evenings, muted dinners, idle conversation, sketches she will show him. But the excavations of his hidden life resist such gentle interventions. He replies with a perfunctory, "Working late." He leaves his phone nestled in his pocket, its screen blank as though denying any acknowledgement of his shame. By midday, he drifts into a meeting room, glass walls dividing the space in clean lines. In that room, colleagues debate strategies, projections, departmental alignments. He offers bullet-point insights, his demeanor calm, voice measured. Each word is chosen to convey competence, every pause placed to sound deliberate rather than tremulous. The meeting concludes, and his subordinates gather around a side table stacked with leftover sandwiches. He thanks them, then slips away before they notice the way his gaze clouds over each time someone mentions balance or wellness. He finds solace instead in a walk through a nearby park, where early spring blossoms dapple the pale grass. He pauses beneath a cherry tree, picking at its petals like sacred relics. A jogger veers past, her laughter lingering in the breeze. He inhales, imagining that petals' fragility is akin to his own state, delicate yet defiant. As evening nears, he meets his sister at a modest bistro she discovered on the edge of the East Village. He pauses beneath a cherry tree, picking at its petals like sacred relics. A jogger veers past, her laughter lingering in the breeze. He inhales, imagining that petals' fragility is akin to his own state, delicate yet defiant. As evening nears, he meets his sister at a modest bistro she discovered on the edge of the East Village. The tables are stocked with glittering glassware and low, amber lights that halo faces in warmth. She greets him with a hug that feels too quick, too carefully rehearsed. As they slide into a booth, she orders tea with a whispered request, "No checkups, I promise." He forces a smile, and they navigate the first minutes with guarded pleasantries. She asks after a coworker whose promotion he mentored, and he replies that the project went smoothly. She tucks a strand of hair behind her ear, then tells him about a new job prospect she is considering, her eyes bright with the hope of escape. He nods, reassuring her with a practiced paternal gaze, though he knows the words hold little weight coming from someone whose own worth is buried beneath compulsion. They linger over dinner, lentil soup for him, a salad for her, each bite measured. He watches her animated expressions, the way she speaks of imagined futures. He wonders if she senses the currents swirling beneath his calm. After dinner, they cross the street to a small apartment building where she lives alone. The narrow hallway smells of lavender air freshener and old paint. She invites him inside, offering him a cup of tea steeped with herbs. He steps into her living room, where pillows in pressed white cotton litter a low couch, and shelves hold sculptures she has pieced together from thrift store finds. The space reflects her history. Framed sketches of childhood fairs, photographs of their father smiling as though unaware of his own shortcomings. She settles beside him and reaches for his hand, her touch both comforting and echoing with unspoken pleas. He lets her talk for a moment about a friend whose relationship feels precarious, nodding as though each word resonates. Then she turns her gaze upon him, searching. "You're not sleeping well," she says softly. He forces a laugh, attributing dark circles to an ill-timed late night catching up on reading. She presses on, recalling how he once shared secrets of all-night phone calls with an unnamed companion. He shifts uncomfortably, refusing to confess that those calls were never mere conversation but part of a hidden ritual designed to shorten his nights and steal his days. She notices his eyes dart toward the small television in the corner, and she smiles with relief, thinking he only wants to switch to the news. He makes an excuse, work calls him back early, and departs into the night. Outside, the street is calm, cars idling at red lights, late-night diners casting glow onto rain-dampened sidewalks. He steps into an empty subway station, descending into a realm drained of daylight logic. In the carriage that rattles beneath the city, he closes his eyes, focusing on the rhythmic sway that carries him away from any notion of normalcy. Each stop he passes draws him closer to a familiar destination he both loathes and craves, a seedy hotel in a forgotten block, where his solitude becomes both friend and tormentor. Inside that dimly lit hotel room, he flicks on the lamp, exposing peeling wallpaper and a bed with rumpled sheets that smell of stale cigarette smoke. He places his briefcase on a side table, its confessional weight both literal and figurative. On the desk sits a small television, its static glow waiting to be signaled. He discards his tie, unbuttons his shirt, and stands for a moment in the hush, the room's emptiness wrapping around him like a lover he cannot trust. He approaches the closet, its door gently squeaking on ancient hinges, and finds beneath a loose plank a hidden cache, a small box of photographs and a pen drive whose contents chart his own appetite in digital files and fevered note. Each image, each click, has woven a tapestry of secret solace and deeper shame. He lets himself drift into ritual, strip, lie across the bed on his stomach, place the remote just beyond reach, and begin. The hours dissolve in the hum of his rituals, impulses once controlled now surging like floodwaters. Each gasp of release reverberates in the hollow chamber, blending with the ticking clock on the nightstand. When he finally collapses, sweat-cooled and drained, his mind unspools into despair. Guilt washes over him like cold rain, chilling him to the bone. The lamp's glow, once a sentinel of artificial safety, feels like a spotlight on a stage where the final act of his shame plays out in endless loop. He falls into a tortured sleep hours before dawn's first light. When he wakes again, the room is bathed in a pale gray that hints at dawn's approach. He closes his eyes for a moment, steel ingot in his chest, then rallies himself, brushing off regret as one might brush away crumbs after a late-night feast. He stands, heart-hammering, and dresses with mechanical precision. He pockets a wad of cash for the taxi ride back to his own apartment, resisting the urge to linger another moment in that hollow nest. In moments, he is back on the street, beneath a sky tinged with pre-sun rose, footsteps carrying him away from excess and toward the steady grind of the world he has painted with feigned order. He returns to the office by mid-morning, passing colleagues he barely greets, but each glance from them feels like a heat-seeking missile. He slips into the cubicle maze and powers on his computer, determined to bury last night's transgressions beneath spreadsheets and meeting notes. He types sentences that map out projections for the quarter, his eyes unseeing as the numbers swim across the screen. Yet beneath that seeming composure, chaos boils. The knowledge that patterns of compulsion, once ignited, cannot be contained by suits and deadlines alone. Late afternoon arrives like a slow-moving tide, and he finds himself in a conference room for a presentation. As he speaks, his voice is steady, his demeanor unshakable, but every once in a while his gaze flickers toward the window, where the city stretches on, indifferent and sprawling. His words about synergy and market growth echo in the sterile space, yet all he hears is the hollow clink of his own failing resolve. A colleague interrupts with a question, and he flinches for a moment before retrieving professional polish. He finishes the presentation, his applause well received, but the victory tastes like ashes on his tongue. The evening dims into twilight as he makes his way home, the city's neon signs materializing one by one against the dusky sky. He enters his building, climbs the silent stairwell, and stands at his apartment door, brushing off urgency with a tight smile. Once inside, he moves through his space with the practiced choreography of someone forever rehearsed. Lock the door, flip on a lamp, brew a pot of coffee to stave off exhaustion. He settles on his couch, leaning back as though bracing for the world's weight. The coffee's heat warms his palms, yet the ache of last night's indulgence still coils around his gut. He stares at the ceiling, his mind tracing a map of cravings and their consequences, and wonders how much longer he can navigate this precarious terrain without losing himself entirely. Before sleep claims him again, he texts his sister, a simple message this time, "Sorry I missed your call. I'll call tomorrow." The coffee's heat warms his palms, yet the ache of last night's indulgence still coils around his gut. He stares at the ceiling, his mind tracing a map of cravings and their consequences, and wonders how much longer he can navigate this precarious terrain without losing himself entirely. Before sleep claims him again, he texts his sister, a simple message this time, "Sorry I missed your call. I'll call tomorrow." No heart emoji, just the stark evidence of distance he tries to maintain. He places the phone face down on the coffee table and breathes as though bracing against a storm. In that brief hush, he hears the echo of yearning that never abates, a pulse that hums beneath every attempt at normalcy. And as the night closes in, he knows the next day will arrive, bringing the same cycle anew: work, craving, ritual, regret, until something shifts, something fractures, or he finds a way to reclaim the self that lies buried beneath shame's deep shadow. Dawn feels fragile, as though the world hesitates before exhaling. He wakes wrapped in hollow quiet, the apartment's emptiness pressing against his skin like a damp shroud. The lamp beside his bed casts a soft glow, illuminating the jagged aftermath of another night's rituals. Discarded tissues, a single pillow stained with regret. He sits on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, tracing the edges of his palms as though searching for fingerprints he can no longer find. His phone lies on the mattress, and for a moment he stares at the black rectangle, knowing her name may appear again on the screen, a battleground between longing and shame. But he does not reach for it. Instead, he stands and moves through the apartment with the precision of a man who has rehearsed his small routines because he fears what might happen if he slows down. He descends to the subway platform, the hum of early commuters building in momentum. Each train that rumbles past carries a potential deliverance and a threat, release or relapse. When he boards, he finds a corner seat and grips the pole, white-knuckled, as the car lurches forward. Outside, neon announcements blur past. A dentist's office, a 24-hour deli, a hardware store closing its shutters. He stares at his reflection in the window, a ghost behind a ghost, and for once wonders how much longer he can carry the weight of his secrets. At work, the flicker of fluorescent lights seems sharper than usual, as though each bulb conspires to highlight his exhaustion. He slides into his cubicle, heart hammering as the screen boots up. His phone buzzes, Heather's name flashing. He exhales, allowing himself a moment of relief before stealing his composure. She left a simple lunchtime invitation. Coffee? He swallows the ache of remembrance. Her face framed by office light when he nearly bared himself in her cubicle, she had been gentler than he deserved. He types back, sure, 2 p.m., and presses send without emotion. The response stirs something in him that feels like possibility, a small crack in the dam of his despair. He makes his way to the lobby's coffee kiosk, the aroma of scorched beans and sugar-laden pastries swirling around him like an ambush. He waits for his order, eyes darting to the revolving doors through which colleagues filter, their footsteps a staccato reminder of the world's unrelenting pace. When Heather steps out from the hallway, her face brightens at the sight of him, and something inside his chest thaws. She slides into the narrow space beside him, ordering a latte with a hint of cinnamon. He nods, preoccupied, and she notices the tightness of his jaw, the way his shoulders slope as though carrying unseen weights. She places a hand on his arm, a silent acknowledgement of battles he won't voice. Their coffee shop conversation drifts between safe topics, weekend plans, office gossip, the absurdity of corporate jargon, but beneath each word simmers a tension neither quite admits. When the clock nudges toward 2:30, he suggests they move to her apartment, a nearby one-bedroom with exposed brick walls and thrift store furniture that brims with her offbeat charm. She hesitates, her expression flickering with both hope and uncertainty, but finally nods. He follows her through streets bathed in afternoon glow, murals twisting across brick facades, fire escapes jutted like metallic vines, the distant hum of traffic humming a lullaby for restless souls. Inside her apartment, a single armchair sits beneath a window where light slants through half-drawn curtains. She directs him to sit and disappears into her small kitchen, returning with 2 glasses of water. They linger on the couch, separated by a coffee table littered with mismatched coasters and the faint scent of lavender from a candle she lit earlier. He stares at the water's rippling surface, as if expecting it to reveal a truth he seeks. She watches him, heart thrumming, wondering whether tenderness can reach him or if he is forever encased in his own shell. When he finally speaks, his voice is guarded, "Thanks for this." He wraps his hands around the glass and sinks into the couch cushions, and she senses the chasm between them, the distance he erects to shield himself. She reaches across, brushing her fingertips against his hand. He flinches, a reflex of isolation, yet something in her gentleness lingers like a promise. She invites him to stay for dinner. He hesitates, aware that admitting intimacy feels like surrender. After a moment's silence, he nods, and without another word, she emerges from the kitchen carrying a plate of pasta. The aroma of garlic and tomato sauce warms the cramped room, and for a heartbeat he allows himself to be present. The soft glow of a single lamp, the gentle clink of her spoon against porcelain. But as soon as he tastes the pasta, the familiar ache returns, a reminder that edible sustenance can sustain the body but not the soul. She watches him chew slowly, her gaze both hopeful and pained, as though she yearns to fill his emptiness with kindness, only to realize that his emptiness stretches far beyond her reach. After dinner, she turns on music, soft jazz drifting from small speakers perched on a shelf. He leans back, closing his eyes as though absorbing each note, as though needing the boundaries of melody to hold him in place. She sits close, draping a blanket over them both. He leans into her, accepting the warmth of that moment like a rare gift. They slip into silence, and for a breath he almost believes he can stay here, he and she and the music suspended in time. But then the tremor returns, small but undeniable, and he pulls away, guilt marshalling him like a finger on a scale. "I should go," he whispers, voice hollow. She rises, eyes shining. "I get it," she says softly. "I'll see you at work tomorrow?" He manages a nod and stands, donning his jacket with trembling hands. She follows him to the door, and as he steps into the corridor's dim light, they share a quick, awkward hug. She brushes a finger against his collar, lingering as though wishing to erase the walls he rebuilds. When he slips out and the door clicks shut, he draws in a ragged breath, knowing he has fled from something precious in search of an escape that never quite materializes. The next day at work, the office feels different, sterile, too bright, suffused with the scent of sour coffee. He sits at his desk, scrolling through emails, but each unread subject line pulses like a siren in his mind. When Heather walks by, she offers a small wave, but he barely returns it, his gaze fixed on a spreadsheet that refuses to anchor him. The day's meetings blur into one another, and he drifts through each presentation as though walking a tightrope beneath a sky that threatens to give way. At mid-morning, his boss calls him into a conference room, doors gliding closed behind him. Inside, his boss sits behind a mahogany desk, her expression calm but firm. She shows him an email from Heather, crisp, polite indentation of concern. "She said you left in the middle of dinner," the boss says quietly, "and she's worried." He nods, cheeks hot. His boss sighs. "If you need help—" He falters at the unspoken understanding. She senses the chasm that yawns beneath his composure. He brushes off the concern with a murmur about personal issues, eager to escape the weight of her gaze. When he returns to his desk, he finds Heather there, watching him with an expression that flutters between anger and sorrow. He averts his eyes, pushing away the risk of her seeing him unravel. That evening, he navigates the city toward a neighborhood of failing neon signs and cracked sidewalks. He approaches a familiar door, the dingy entrance to a short-term hotel that caters to transactions he has long called lifelines. Inside, the scent of stale cigarettes drapes the hallway, and he moves past room after room, guided by a tiny flicker of hope that this time the darkness will quench the ache. He opens the door to a room scattered with worn sheets and a single lamp perched on a flickering nightstand. The lamp's light fights the gloom like a feeble spark. He steps across the threshold, his reflection ghosted on the grimy window facing the street. He exhales, as though willing himself to collapse into the familiar pattern. But as he stands in the hush, something halts him. The hubbub of neon traffic outside, the faint song of a siren drifting past, and in that lull a memory surfaces. His sister's voice, steady and warm, reaching for him that one night. He hesitates, the lane of impulse wobbling. Then, with a furtive glance around the room, he turns on his heel and leaves, stepping out into the hallway and pressing the door closed without looking back. He walks away so swiftly that his footsteps echo as a hollow hymn. He descends the stairs 2 at a time, each step ringing like a gavel on a courtroom floor. Outside, the city unfolds in a wash of headlights and distant music, and he breathes in the night's thick air, feeling a cinder of relief kindle in his chest. Once home, he emerges from a trance, heart hammering and clothes damp with city's humidity. He dials his sister's number, hands shaking as the call rings. When she answers, her voice meets him like a lifeline across churning seas. "Hey," he says, voice rough and small. She asks if he's okay, her concern wrapping him in moonlight. He pauses, as though gathering courage, and confesses only a fragment. "I nearly sent you my address," he admits. She exhales on the other end, a breath of relief and fear. "Come over," she urges. "I want to see you." Within minutes, he is navigating the city's arteries again, sinking into a taxi's back seat as neon signs blur past. He tries to mend himself with simple rationales. He didn't cross the final threshold, therefore it counts as progress. But the labyrinth within him remains uncharted, each corridor leading back to the same dark center. He steps from the taxi outside his sister's building, his heart fluttering like broken wings. She meets him in the lobby, arms outstretched, warmth flooding him in a way he has not felt in months. She leads him upstairs, where the glow of soft lamps and the hush of jazz records fill her small living room. He slips off his shoes and sinks onto her couch as though landing on solid ground for the first time in an eternity. She makes tea, lemon balm and chamomile, and the steam curls between them like smoke. He holds the cup in both hands, savoring its gentle heat, and she watches him with a quiet patience. He talks in fragments, pieces of confession tearing loose, a near fall at the hotel door, the way he has haunted the boundaries of self-control, each relapse a stone dropped in a well, his soul rippling in widening circles. She listens, voice unshaken, stepping close to brush a strand of hair from his forehead. In her eyes, he sees a fierce longing for his salvation, and for the first time he wonders if he might deserve redemption. Morning finds them in her kitchen, coffee steaming in chipped mugs, the sun warming the chipped linoleum beneath their feet. She moves through the small space with a gentle rhythm, forging eggs and toast as though weaving memories into breakfast. He sits at the table, the smell of frying bacon wrapping him in a cocoon of nostalgia for simpler times. Childhood mornings when pancakes were his favorite and laughter was currency. She slides a plate before him, and he tastes its simplicity as though rediscovering a language he had forgotten. In that moment, he allows himself to connect. The feel of her presence, the softness of the coffee's warmth, the taste of food that nourishes body and spirit. Later, she leads him to her bedroom where she keeps a scrapbook, pages filled with photographs of their shared past. She flips through them, a photo of him at age 10 riding a bicycle down a sunlit sidewalk, face lit with glee, another of them building a pillow fort during a thunderstorm, huddled together against the darkness. He traces those images with tears in his eyes, each photograph an anchor pulling him back from the abyss. She places her hand on his shoulder, and he allows himself to lean into her steadiness. In that act, he feels the beginnings of a fragile hope, that connection, not chaos, might hold him. That afternoon, he returns to his apartment alone, the city outside now draped in the rose-gold glow of sunset. He steps inside, the scent of stale air and urban grime greeting him like an old adversary. He closes the door and stands in the center of the living room, the silence amplifying the shadows in each corner. He breathes deeply, recalling his sister's unwavering gaze, and he realizes that the one weakness he holds in common with his craving, the desperate need for oblivion, can be countered by the simple force of memory. He walks to his hidden alcove, heart hammering, and shuts the curtain. But instead of booting up his addiction's arsenal, he pulls from his pocket a folded photograph, the one his sister slipped him that morning, capturing them as children, arms thrown wide in laughter beneath a summer sky. He places that photo atop the monitor cradle, an altar to what he stands to lose. Night returns in silence, the city's neon pulse dimming into dreams. He breathes deeply, recalling his sister's unwavering gaze, and he realizes that the one weakness he holds in common with his craving, the desperate need for oblivion, can be countered by the simple force of memory. He walks to his hidden alcove, heart hammering, and shuts the curtain. But instead of booting up his addiction's arsenal, he pulls from his pocket a folded photograph, the one his sister slipped him that morning, capturing them as children, arms thrown wide in laughter beneath a summer sky. He places that photo atop the monitor cradle, an altar to what he stands to lose. Night returns in silence, the city's neon pulse dimming into dreams. He lies in bed, staring at the ceiling, the photograph's image drifting through his mind like a soft echo. He vows that tomorrow he will walk away from those familiar rituals, that he will refuse to cross thresholds that lead to decay. The last of the streetlights outside casts a pale glow across his quilted sheets, and he closes his eyes, the first genuine sleep edging in as forgiveness settles around his shoulders. When dawn arrives and the city stretches once more into waking light, he steps into the corridor of his apartment building, not as a man reshaped by shattering, but as one slowly remade by memory. The elevator doors open and he rides down to the lobby, shoulders straight, breathing with a measured rhythm. Outside, the morning air feels different, less like a gauntlet and more like a promise. He walks down the street toward the subway station, the turnstile clicking beneath his palm, and as the train rumbles toward the platform, he closes his eyes and allows himself to believe that, despite everything, he has begun to gather the fragments of a life that can stretch beyond shadows and shame. He moves through the world like a ghost tethered to flesh, a thin veneer of formality masking an inner tumult that churns like a storm. In his tailored suits, every crease precise, every collar crisp, he appears the epitome of control. Handsome features, dark hair neatly combed, posture impeccable. But beneath the calm surface, an ache pulses, a current of longing that stiffens his spine and flares behind his eyes. He is both hunter and prey, driven by compulsions he cannot name, chasing fleeting relief while knowing each pursuit will only hollow him further. His gaze often flickers with that sudden, unbidden hunger, as though he scans every passerby, searching for a sign of escape. In moments of unguarded stillness, standing on a subway platform or pausing before a mirrored window, his reflection gazes back at him with a pitiless intensity, as though accusing him of surrendering to impulses that he neither wants nor can deny. When dawn breaks, he dresses with mechanical precision, the ritual of shaving and buttoning his shirt a precious few minutes of sanctuary before the day's chaos resumes. Each morning, he stands alone in his sleek apartment, a space both elegant and devoid of warmth, allowing himself a breath before stepping into the world he has built to shield himself from craving. When he pauses to sip coffee, its bitterness mirrors his own detachment, grounding him momentarily in something real. Yet even as he reads the day's news on a tablet or scrolls through his calendar, a quiet tension knots at his stomach. Every email notification holds the potential to carry both trivial work demands and invitations to a darker escape. He steels himself, insisting that today, this one day, he can keep the hunger at bay. At the office, he becomes a study in compartmentalization. Colleagues see a man of order and achievement, crisp presentations, strategic insights, a calm voice that commands attention. He moves among them with an almost glacial composure, offering polite nods and occasional wry remarks. In conference rooms under fluorescent glare, he listens, responds, and exudes professional confidence. When superiors compliment his work, he accepts the praise with only a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes, never too jubilant, always contained. His outward demeanor masks an inner swirl. Part of him marvels at his ability to perform as though nothing else exists, but another part recoils at the stark contrast between performance and private desperation. In silent moments, screen dimming to sleep, screensaver flickering, he wonders if his colleagues glimpse the shadows beneath his practiced calm. By lunchtime, he slips into a routine designed to minimize risk. He chooses a crowded deli so there is no time for idle reverie. He orders quickly, scanning the menu's simplest items, sandwich and water, trying to replicate a ritual of normalcy. Seated at a window table, he watches passers-by scurry through midday traffic, their laughter and small talk a soundtrack he envies. He eats in measured bites, chewing slowly, forcing himself to focus on texture and temperature. Each swallow is a small victory, pushing at the edge of a gnawing emptiness he cannot name aloud. Beneath his white-collar attire, his seatbelt of self-control tightens with each passing second, reminding him that the world's eyes are upon him, that any slip could trigger a chain reaction he cannot halt. When afternoon drags on, he grows restless. He drapes his jacket over the chair, rubs his temples, and bends over his keyboard as though to vanquish the disquiet. Typing becomes white noise, the clack of keys a barrier between him and that simmering urge. When no one watches, he leans back in his chair, eyes half closed, as if listening to the hum of air conditioners, the quiet murmur of colleagues, anything to distract from the insistent drum of need. He completes tasks with a split attention. Numbers and charts fill the screen, but his mind drifts to that place he visits when the day's veneer cracks. A dimly lit hotel room, the soft glow of a television screen, the fragile hour before dawn when everything he has built falls away. He carries his burden home like a stone in his pocket, each step heavy with anticipation and dread. At night, he navigates the city's veins, streets flickering with neon, bars throbbing with music, faces blurred in the glare of headlamps. He seeks a refuge so familiar it feels like a promise, that pale brick facade of a decaying hotel, its lobby lit by a single flickering bulb. When he crosses the threshold, the elevator's ding resonates like a toll. Each floor he passes echoes a question. How far will he go tonight? In that hush before the door opens, he steels himself, reminding himself this is only a choice, a momentary lapse, a cinematic scene he can exit whenever he pleases. Once inside the room, he turns on the lamp, its amber glow skittering across peeling wallpaper. The bed, a nest of tangled sheets, beckons with whispered allure. He sheds his suit jacket and tie, slings them over a chair, and stands for a moment in the silence, heart clenching with shame. He looks at the lamp as though it judges him, but its light is indifferent, a mere concession to practicality. Then he settles onto the edge of the bed, the air thick with the scent of stale upholstery and anticipation. In that private crucible, he loses himself, each moment of release tainted by a rush of immediacy followed by the bitter aftertaste of guilt. As dawn creeps through the crack beneath the curtains, he lies still, sweat-slick and hollow, aware that the world outside spins on whether he claims it or relinquishes it to his demons. His sister's presence arrives like a lifeline woven in threads of concern and fierce love. She enters his world with a knock at the door, wearing a bright scarf that matches the concern in her eyes. Her room exudes warmth, soft lamps, bookshelves lined with mementos, photos of their father laughing before his health failed. She ushers him into a small living room, offering tea that steams like a benediction. She asks direct questions, simple ones at first, about work, about whether he's eating enough, about how often he sleeps. He offers practiced deflections, tucking behind neat evasions. But her gaze slices through the facade, noticing how his hands tremble as he lifts the cup, how his shoulders hunch as though carrying a weight too heavy to name. She presses on with gentleness disguised as determination, recounting their childhood, how they escaped into bookstores when he was 10 and lost themselves in illustrated fairy tales, how he once taught her an imaginary world they built beneath a blanket fort during a storm. She reminds him of his penchant for laughter, the way his smile once ignited theirs. Her voice pools in the silence like a lullaby, coaxing something soft from his hardened heart. He tries to resist, to raise walls where she senses breaches, but in a moment of rawness, he allows tears to slip past, single drips that track down cheeks he once thought impermeable. She leans forward, foreheads touching, as though channeling all the tenderness he refuses to claim. In that brief communion, he tastes hope, though fear snarls in his gut, warning that hope makes a good target. She urges him toward therapy, to meet a counselor who specializes in the fragile architecture of desire and shame. He balks at first, wounded by the very notion that he is someone who needs help. Yet in her unwavering gaze, he glimpses a reflection of a man he once was, whole, curious, capable of connection that extended beyond pursuit and shame. He books the appointment at her insistence, each keystroke on his phone a tremor across his chest. The next morning, as he enters the counselor's waiting room, sterile yet suffused with the promise of confidentiality, he feels both fear and reluctant yearning. When he finally sits across from a woman whose voice is measured and kind, he rambles through fragments of his struggle. She listens without flinching, anchoring him with gentle nods and carefully posed questions. By session's end, he walks out into the crisp afternoon air, carrying knowledge of his unraveling, but also hope that he can rewrite the script he has long believed irreversible. Meanwhile, his relationship with the woman he nearly fell into that night on the rooftop surfaces as a poignant counterpoint. She emerges in his life like a comet, radiant, unpredictable, a fleeting reflection of possible redemption. They meet by chance in a wine bar where soft lights halo glasses of Tuscan red. She sits at a corner table, sketchbook open, ink flowing as she captures snippets of patrons, the curve of a shoulder, the tilt of a head in laughter. He orders a glass and her gaze glints with recognition. Here is someone who drinks not to chase ghosts but to taste smoke and spice. He takes a seat nearby, drawn by her quiet intensity. They talk in curves of conversation. Books, art, childhood fears, each word measured yet vulnerable. She sees his calm as brittle, touching him gently as though testing for cracks. He flinches beneath her kindness, unsure whether to flee or embrace the warmth she offers. Over twilight dinners, they share stories painted in watercolor, films that move them, poems they recite in whispers, the songs that make their hearts ache. Each moment with her is a jolt. He recognizes how intimacy can be more frightening than exposure, how her warmth could both save and shatter him. He battles a silent dread, that allowing himself to connect means risking her safety, dragging her into the whirlpool of his compulsion. Yet he cannot resist the pull of her empathy, the way her fingers linger when they touch. Then, just as tender moments deepen, his hunger roars back, fracturing his resolve. A sudden urgency claws at him during a walk beneath street lamps when he excuses himself, his pulse thrumming against his ribs. She waits at the bar, worry creasing her brow, as he slips away into the night. When he returns hours later, sweat slick, heart bleached by shame, her disappointment settles in his chest like a stone. He tries to explain, but words falter. She touches his face once, gently, and in that hold he senses both forgiveness and fracture. She tells him she cares, more than he dares deserve, and in that moment his heart flares with longing, mingled with a raw terror, the fear of losing her because he cannot escape himself. As his world unravels, his sister's dogged presence emerges as a lifeline. She arrives unannounced one morning, gently pressing a letter into his hand, appointment times with a group for those wrestling similar demons. She dares him to attend, to sit among strangers whose faces show vulnerabilities he shares. That evening, he slips into a modest church basement where fluorescent lights halo folding chairs. At first, he curls into himself, noting the raw courage etched on each attendee's face, in their hung heads, shaky voices, desperate humor. When the leader asks for volunteers to share, he remains glued to his seat. But as others speak, breaking through layers of shame in voices that quaver yet grow stronger, he senses the fragile bonds of empathy weaving between them. When it comes to his turn, he speaks in halting phrases. The constant pull, the dance of pursuit and regret, the futile attempts to silence his own heart. He fights tears, but they slip through, and the room hushes as strangers offer nods and gentle applause. For the first time, he steps into daylight, where hidden needs are no longer ruins to be ashamed of but shared truths that beckon toward healing. In his therapist's office that follows, he unravels his narrative, how his father's absence carved a hollow in his heart, how he turned to compulsions to fill that void, how he built a fortress of solitude to shield himself from vulnerability. Each revelation feels like a stone removed from his chest, leaving him lighter yet raw. Through sling of tears and sudden moments of clarity, he begins to map pathways out of his labyrinth. He pledges to replace the lonely nights in hotel rooms with evenings of honest conversation, to trade the ache of secret pursuit for the quiet courage of connection. He emerges from that session as dusk filters through city windows. Each revelation feels like a stone removed from his chest, leaving him lighter yet raw. Through sling of tears and sudden moments of clarity, he begins to map pathways out of his labyrinth. He pledges to replace the lonely nights in hotel rooms with evenings of honest conversation, to trade the ache of secret pursuit for the quiet courage of connection. He emerges from that session as dusk filters through city windows, his heart trembling with unsteady hope. He calls the woman from the bar, voice unsteady as he asks if they can meet. Speaking from his apartment, he hears her smile through the phone, "I've missed you." He arranges to see her at a small art gallery where she's exhibiting sketches, each ink line a fragment of her soul. When he arrives, she stands before a charcoal drawing of a moonlit park. As he approaches, she turns, and in her eyes he finds reflection rather than judgment. They walk to a bench beneath a window that looks onto a bustling street. He takes her hand, feels the warmth ripple through him. For a moment, he stands on the edge of something new, a life shaped by shared vulnerabilities rather than solitary compulsion. In a final reckoning, he returns to his apartment late one night, not to succumb but to dismantle the last refuge of his shame. He gathers the detritus of his darkest nights, photographs, hidden drives, miscellaneous paraphernalia, into a box. He seals it, labeling it "Past," and chooses a reputable disposal service to shred and sanitize. As the garbage truck rumbles past at dawn, carrying away that box like casting off a past self, he breathes in hope's fragile glow. His reflection in the window seems less haunted, the haunted lines softened by the weight he has let go. He rises the next morning, a subtle tremor of anticipation in his chest. He dresses with care yet without rigidity, selecting a shirt that feels warm rather than armor. He texts his sister, "Thank you," and her reply breezes across the screen, "Always here." He smiles, a smile both tentative and true, before stepping into the city's embrace. Each step forward feels a testament to his shifting horizons. The promise that identity, once forged by isolation and hunger, can be reformed through grace and connection. The world stretches before him, vast and uncertain, yet for the first time he believes he can meet it without fear that his shadows will swallow him whole. In this unfolding journey, his story becomes neither an epitaph of shame nor a simplistic triumph but a testament to resilience. He is a man scarred by compulsion, fear, and waiting, yet one who, piece by fragile piece, reclaims himself. His silhouette, once a tormented flicker against city lights, now strides with purpose toward an uncertain dawn, guided by knowledge that healing resides not in perfection but in the courage to keep walking toward the light. In the hush before dawn, a hush so quiet it felt as though the world itself were holding its breath, the crew tiptoed onto the vast vacant soundstage in Manhattan, their footsteps echoing like ghostly whispers. The air crackled with anticipation, the kind born of a project so delicate, so daring, that every individual seemed tethered to a fragile secret. Under flickering fluorescent lights, long tables bore piles of scripts, each page a map of forbidden desire and raw confession. As the first of the key grips hunched over his equipment, adjusting the rig to catch the perfect glimmer of morning light through a makeshift window, there arose the faintest hum, the opening bars of a carefully chosen track that would later resonate in the opening montage of the film. It was a song of lonely longing, one that set a tone both enthralling and unsettling, and at that moment it felt less like music and more like an incantation murmured to coax the right kind of magic from cameras and lenses. On this very stage, moments later, Michael Fassbender strode in, his presence simultaneously electrifying and unnerving. In the dim glow of tuning lights, he stood barefoot on a patch of unvarnished plywood that had been designated as his workspace. Rumor whispered that he refused to set foot in any scene clothed in shoes, insisting that every step he took be imbued with raw vulnerability. His trainer had meticulously sculpted muscles that flexed beneath his white t-shirt, and when the first cameraman swept past, Michael's eyes flickered with a calculated intensity. In that flicker lay the essence of the film's strange heartbeat, a dance between exhibition and concealment. He would bare his flesh on screen like a sacrificial offering, yet off-camera, he guarded his privacy fiercely, never lingering long in the makeup chair, slipping out of sweaty rehearsal clothes the moment a scene ended, as though repelled by the very intimacy he so willingly displayed to millions. By lunchtime, the cast and crew gathered on a sidewalk outside a modest deli on 12th Street. The line twisted into the street, a tangle of anxious extras, seasoned lighting technicians seeking warm sandwiches, and assistants clutching trays of caffeinated beverages. Speakers hidden beneath a tarp trickled the day's soundtrack into the midday sun, but more than the music, it was the conversations that hummed with intrigue. One of the assistants, a lanky man with a perpetual squint, confided that during yesterday's shoot of an especially explicit night scene, shot in a cramped motel room staged to feel like a vessel of both salvation and undoing, a tiny sleep light's rig malfunctioned, sending sparks showering across the bed. The prop master leapt into action, swatting at the makeshift fire with a frayed pillowcase, while Michael, caught mid-scene, barely blinked, his concentration so taut that not even a few embers brushing his shoulder drew him out of character. By the time the hairstylist discovered the smoldering wire behind a nightstand, the director had already called "cut," praising Michael for maintaining an authenticity that transcended all but the most surreal of circumstances. One of the strangest footnotes of that shoot, passed in hushed tones, concerned the hotel room's headboard, which had been scavenged from an actual defunct Broadway flop. The furniture rental company had assured the production designer that it was merely a relic of another era, an ornate mahogany crest carved with motifs that seemed to flicker like half-remembered dreams. What they hadn't mentioned was that on opening night, the Broadway audience had walked into a room adorned by the same headboard, only then called The Weeping Chestnut, a play that closed after one performance when the lead actor fainted during intermission. The table for that evening's special was carved into the wood, a frantic scrawl from the understudy, perhaps offering a final, desperate plea to a god of overdue applause. In the film, that headboard served as a silent witness to scenes of barely contained surrender, its chipped carvings absorbing every gasp and exhalation as though stitching them into its grain. After shooting wrapped, the headboard was rumored to have been burned in a private ceremony by the production designer, as if to expunge its ghostly resonance, though some claim it ended up in a dusty warehouse in Queens, waiting to haunt another story. Back on set, the makeup artists whispered about an anomaly that materialized one chilly evening in a cramped corridor. As the lead actress, Carey Mulligan, advanced toward a drizzly location near the East River, she paused beneath a flickering light, her breath catching in a perfect plume of vapor. Beneath her coat, her cheeks were intentionally flushed with a rosy glow, a sign of the character's youthful activism and fragile hope. Yet crew members noticed that as she stepped into the light, her glittering eyes sparkled not with stagecraft but with tears that were entirely unscripted. A signal from the director cut the scene prematurely, and the cinematographer, his lens still trained on her, captured that moment of raw emotion. When questioned later, Carey explained that the cerulean of the river had reminded her of a childhood memory. An afternoon spent skipping stones with her father. Nothing in the script triggered that sorrowful smile. The director chose to tuck that extra frame into the final cut, a fleeting embellishment that no audience would glimpse without slow playback. It became one of those filmic secrets that would circulate among cinephiles for years, an unscripted tear wandering across the curve of an actor's cheek, a sorrow conjured from the depths of a memory too poignant for words. Meanwhile, Michael's preparation for the role included an unusual living arrangement. He leased a sparse loft in Soho, deliberately devoid of furniture save for a mattress and a small desk. The rest of the space lay empty, floors echoing with the sounds of his solitary existence. Castmates would occasionally arrive for rehearsals, the echo of their footsteps startling them on those vast, empty floors. One afternoon, during a break, Carey arrived with a bag of groceries and paused at the threshold, noticing Michael seated cross-legged on the mattress, staring at nothing. She asked if he was hungry, and he gestured toward a single apple perched on the desk. They ate in silence, the crunch of fruit a fragile tether between two actors navigating the precipice of their characters' inner lives. That loft, scattered with the occasional sketchbook and unlit candle, came to embody the character's own isolation, mirroring the long, lonely nights of a man for whom the world's intimacy was perpetually beyond reach. After filming concluded, Michael handed the keys back, and the loft was promptly repainted, a whitewash that felt like an attempt to scrub away the emotional residue that had clung to its bare walls. One of the film's more whispered-about curiosities involved a late-night shoot under the Williamsburg Bridge. At 2 a.m., the crew constructed a tableau of street lamps and potholes to evoke the grit and loneliness of the characters' nocturnal wanderings. As the cameras rolled, a stray cat slunk into frame, paws silent on cracked asphalt, eyes glinting with cautious curiosity. Rather than shoo it away, the director allowed the animal to remain, guiding the cat toward an unsuspecting Michael as though to imply that even the city's smallest creatures felt an otherworldly kinship with his solitude. The cat, camera-shy and fitful, wound its way around his ankles in the critical shot, its purr audible in the microphone's cage. That purring was woven into the final audio mix, an echo of companionship born of alienated midnight hours. Locals on the circa 1930s decks of the bridge later told rumors that any who lingered after dark could hear the faint echo of that purr, a fleeting tribute to the film's unbidden intersections between reality and cinema's constructed illusions. Deep into the third week of shooting, the costume department staged a clandestine intervention of sorts. Michael's character often appeared in budget-tailored suits that hung on his sinewy frame like second skins, neither comfortable nor indulgent. One morning, when Michael arrived for an early scene, he discovered a single package waiting on the sofa of the star's trailer. Inside lay a bespoke leather jacket, tactile and supple, crafted by an independent designer who had dared to interpret the character's yearning for freedom. Scrawled upon a small card were the words, "For the man who longs for wings." Intrigued, he slipped the jacket on beneath his white shirt and felt the difference immediately. The leather's warmth, its gentle resistance when he moved, awakened something he had not felt on set, a sense of safe rebellion. Though he wore it only during off-camera moments, the mood shift was palpable. During one break, as cameras reset for a grueling hospital corridor sequence, he sauntered through the set wearing only the new jacket over a t-shirt, the entourage of grips and gaffers eyeing him in surprise. In that instant, he embodied a variant of his role, a man caught between the confines of obligation and the allure of self-reinvention. Film scholars later pointed to that jacket as an emblem of the character's latent desire for release, a sartorial footnote that made it into the costume's subtext, if not the final Catone evening, as the cast and crew assembled for a crucial rooftop finale. A prankster among the extras tampered with the set's radio, queuing up a jaunty pop song at an awkward moment when the actor was meant to deliver an anguished monologue. The first notes of that unexpected track, an upbeat chorus of sweet nothings, gushed into the night air, colliding with the intensity of the scene. Michael froze mid-speech, his brow furrowed as the incongruous melody threatened to dissolve his emotional focus. The director, watching through the monitor, interrupted with a shout of amused exasperation. The sound mixer scrambled to mute the speaker, and the playful shade of laughter rippled through the crew. Michael, still in character, sighed and, with an offhand gesture, waved away the distraction before restarting his speech. That moment of collective levity became part of the set's lore, a reminder that even in the midst of crafting a world of stifled yearning, a single uninvited chord could crack the fortress of cinematic seriousness and invite human fallibility back in. During shooting in a vintage Lower East Side loft, designed to serve as a symbolic refuge in the film, one of the walls turned out to be, unwittingly, a century-old mural painted by a Depression-era artist. The production designer, upon peeling back a layer of modern plaster to mount a flat-screen TV, discovered a muted fresco of a woman cradling a bowl of bread. Instead of erasing or painting over it, the director decreed that the mural remain exposed, a hidden witness to the character's inner hunger and yearning. In the final cut, the loft's interior gleams with unexpected flickers of ochre and gray behind meticulously placed furniture, an unspoken testament to the echoes of struggle that resonate across decades. That mural became one of the film's most whispered-about curiosities, a symbolic tie between the protagonist's emotional famine and the physical scars etched into the city's fabric by those who endured far worse. The film's music also contained secrets. Early in post-production, the composer revealed that he had recorded a dozen alternate versions of the central theme, layering jazz piano with cello, then stripping it back to a lone acoustic guitar, and even experimenting with sparse electronic pulses. The director, too, lifted a glass, eyes shining with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. In that setting, rumors found form, whispered confessions about alternate takes that nearly unraveled entire arcs, anecdotes of midnight calls to reshoot scenes when weather betrayed schedules, and lingering jokes that only insiders would understand. For an outsider, it may have seemed like any rap party, but for those who had labored in the silent corridors of that Manhattan soundstage, it was a consecration, a celebration of shadows conjured, secrets shared, and a story that had danced on the edge of taboo and art. This tapestry of oddities, half-hidden incidents, and whispered lore has become part of the film's enduring mystique. Though audiences may never perceive the flicker of a stray tear, the flash of cobalt fire from a lamp, or the silhouette of an accordion player through rain-streaked glass, these moments linger beneath the surface, silent currents that propel the narrative's raw intensity. The film stands not only as a testament to a director's vision and a cast's fearless devotion, but also as a repository for the countless oddities that arise when art dares to map the uncharted territories of desire and solitude. And so, beyond the theater's flickering screen, beyond the fleeting rush of credit after credit, the strangest truths of this cinematic journey wait in hushed corners. In a repurposed headboard that once watched a Broadway belly flop, in a mildew-scented hotel room where ghosts of desire roamed, in the flicker of an unscripted tear, in the loneliness of a loft bathed in morning glow, in the shards of cobalt light and the sound of a stray accordion beneath bridge arches, there exists a reality that only those who roamed the set could glimpse, a reality that whispers. Even the most isolating hunger can find communion in the smallest gesture, whether that is a cat's silent paw on a midnight countertop or a single photograph tucked beneath a script. These are the strangest facts of the film's creation, neither fully seen nor wholly denied, waiting to be discovered by the curious eye, the steadfast cineast, or the heart that yearns to know what stirs beneath cinema's polished surface. Dawn arrives slowly, fraught with the kind of tension that stirs the city's undercurrents before sunrise's pale light has even touched the skyline. In the hush of his solitary apartment, he rises to a ritual as mechanical as it is symbolic. The cheap alarm on his bedside table clicks off, and he emerges from the sheets, a man who has already surrendered to the demands of his craving even before his first step. He moves through his pristine bathroom, shaving with meticulous precision, a gesture as much about crafting appearances as it is about warding off the truth he fears will bleed through unguardedly. The opening sequence unfolds in near silence, save for the faint hiss of running water and the muted scrape of razor against skin. Cinematographically, this moment serves as a stark overture, inviting viewers into the fractured psyches that cinema rarely dares to explore, a man disciplined to the point of architectural rigidity, yet hollowed out by a loneliness so deep it threatens to consume him. When he pads across the hardwood toward his kitchen, the camera follows in a lingering tracking shot, its gentle sway reflecting his unsteady balance between control and compulsion. He pours coffee, black, no sugar, a small anchor against his encroaching urges. Each measured step in the apartment's narrow corridor is anchored by the inevitability of his next move, toward the subway, toward the world's throbbing pulse, and inevitably, back toward the hollow cold of his secret sanctuary. Critics have noted that these early moments establish not only his discipline but hint at the chasm between his disciplined exterior and the fractured interior. The soft hum of ambient sound, a subtle orchestration of distant traffic and early morning quiet, underscores his isolation. He moves through a landscape that will not yield to his attempt at normalcy. Descending into the underbelly of the city's subway system, he descends into a realm where anonymity thrums like an electrical current. Here, dark corridors and fluorescent flickers carve out his uncertainty, and the camera's handheld design lends an unflinching intimacy that places the audience at the brink of his storm. Each arriving train brings the promise of connection and collapse in equal measure, and the cacophonous roar of brakes dissolving into a hiss of doors becoming eyes that flick briefly on his face, unseeing yet somehow recording his presence in the city's vast grid. Film scholars have pointed to these sequences as examples of director Steve McQueen's mastery of space. The subway is both a vessel of public life and private despair. In its cold metal confines, he is forced into moments of introspective collision, staring at advertisements for vacations he will never take and at passengers whose casual interactions feel as alien to him as the highway's widening chasm. Upon reaching his office, a corporate fortress of glass-walled conference rooms and polished cubicles, he morphs into a different creature. The film's editing here slices between his stoic face and the ceaseless flurry of spreadsheets, emails, and conference calls, each cut hammering home the absurdity of his existence. A man who navigates spreadsheets by day, while nights are claimed by an insatiable need that statistics cannot quantify. Critics have lauded these scenes for their brutally honest depiction of contemporary alienation. The urban professional who appears accomplished, but whose years of carefully constructed identity crack beneath the weight of addiction. When his boss compliments his quarterly report, he offers a polite nod of thanks, but the camera's lingering close-up traps a flicker of something more, a man whose world is meaningless unless he can transcend it through a sequence of private acts he performs in darkness. Lunch offers no respite. He walks to a nearby deli, a place packed to the brim with young professionals and baristas wielding foamy cappuccinos like talismans. He orders quietly, no eye contact, then sits at a grimy window table, the glass glazed with the grime of midday. He chews deliberately, scans the street for signs of what? He cannot name it, but the tension knits itself into the lines around his mouth. The choice to place him at such a bustling microcosm of the city underscores one of the film's core themes, the jarring dissonance between appearance and interior life. When he pauses, dropping his gaze to a half-finished sandwich, the film's score twinges with discordant strings, an oral cue that the veneer of his civility is paper-thin. Critics have pointed out that this lunchtime interlude functions less as a moment of reprieve and more as a crucible in which his chaos is brought into sudden relief.